The Multimedia Ninja Podcast, episode 58. Hello again, and welcome to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast, where it's all about surviving and thriving in the digital convergence. My name is Bradford Rogers, and I'll be interviewing some multimedia ninjas who are making things happen in their respective fields and sharing tips, tools, and insights for multimedia artists and content creators. As always, you can find show notes at themultimedianinja.com. This week, Dr. Rachel Watson. As you may know, in this podcast series, my friends and I will be talking about all things multimedia, including creativity, shaping your ideas, and how to be more productive doing it, regardless of what kind of content you're creating. We have got an exciting episode for you today, so what do you say we just let's get to it? All right, we are here at the Red Room today, the slightly damp Red Room these days, but I'm going to get right to it because we have a very special guest in studio with us today, Dr. Rachel Watson, Professor of American Literature and Doctor of American Literature at Howard University. And as you might guess, we might be talking about writing today. Good to have you here, by the way.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
We may or may not have gone out with the Admiral and company last night and had a margarita.
Maybe.
But that's
it might have happened.
That's on the down low. Anyway, we'll get through it today one way or another with some coffee and copious amounts of water. But a lot of our ninjas out there are no doubt challenged or faced or having the pleasure of the opportunity to write for blogs and for various other sort of publications and whatnot in support of their normal activities. Some drag kicking and screaming, and some actually doing it for pleasure. But we are hoping that you may be able to shed some light on some of these matters today.
I'd be delighted to.
So I understand you've written a few 100,000 pages probably by now.
I've written a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. How many pages do you think you have written?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, my dissertation was relatively short. I think it was about 250 pages.
Oh, that's nothing.
Yeah, not such a big deal.
How much do you have to write in the course of course preparation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I do a lot of writing for course preparation because I like to write down all my thoughts about the reading that we're going to be discussing that day. But then I actually don't ever look at my notes when I teach, and so and I never reread them. So the writing, I think, is a kind of ritual, or maybe it just kind of organizes my thoughts and makes them more present, so I can kind of access them while I'm standing in front of 20 pairs of eyeballs that are staring at me, and I get nervous.
I see you've got your moleskin notebook with you here.
I do.
And I've got my Draplin and Company field notes as well. So we have different note. And what was the very cool notebook you mentioned
my
earlier?
New favorite is Blackwing Palomino notebook.
Interesting.
Journal. Yeah. I don't have one with me, unfortunately, but that's my new favorite.
I'll have to see if I can look that up.
I'll send you one.
Oh, okay. You won't have to say that twice. Anyway, before we get into the writing thing, it's time for the segment we like to call Winners and Losers. This week's winner is Minko Emmanuel, a.k.a. Ya Minko from Gabon.
Winner!
And he has a single out called with his friends Ab Fad and Plex Major from Sierra Leone and Erwin Dollar from Cameroon. And the single is called Unforgettable. Check it out. I'll put a link to him on Twitter. It's at Minko Emmanuel, but he goes by Ya Minko. And he also has a single out, Don't Cry For Me. Which, by the way, if you're a kiddo, that may not be safe for work. It may contain adult language, but we can handle that around here because we're used to it. So, but I'll put a link. I believe it is, again, at Minko Emmanuel on Twitter, but it may have an underscore in there. I'll have to look that up. So anyway, back to writing.
Yeah.
A lot of people probably you've run into, a lot of students in your classes may make some certain mistakes over and over again. What would you say is the worst or the most pernicious one that you see over and over?
Well, my favorite mistake is the passive voice.
Ah, yes. And why is that?
Well, it's my favorite mistake for a lot of reasons, but one is because fixing it actually makes writing a lot more fun. So it not only improves your writing, but it also makes writing a more pleasurable activity once you learn to recognize it and address it.
And for people who may be unfamiliar, how do you detect and define, how do you know it's passive voice?
Yeah. So the passive voice, another reason it's my favorite mistake is because students are often kind of flummoxed by it because they've heard about it from other teachers, but they're never quite sure of how to recognize it. And one easy way to think about recognizing passive voice is to ask yourself, when you're describing something, ask yourself whether you are pointing at an inert object or whether you are describing a living, breathing being.
Okay.
So, like, for example, you could say, this album is great. That's passive voice because you're sort of pointing at something and describing a fixed quality that it has that doesn't change over time, versus saying, this album sounds great, which describes a kind of living, breathing, active quality that can change over time and is alive.
Gotcha. And it sounds like a lot of times maybe there's a be verb involved in the passive voice.
That's right. Yeah. And so to fix the passive voice, it's good to have a toolkit of active verbs that you really like using. And so the bigger your toolkit of verbs, the more kind of exciting and precise your writing can be.
Gotcha. And I've noticed in a project recently too, there are constructions like, and many people have pointed this out. In fact, I mentioned in another episode the William Zinsser book on writing well, which I think is very cool. So,
I like that book.
Yeah, very awesome. And so constructions like I was affected by blah, blah, blah is kind of blah compared to, I got really angry or there may be probably a better one than that.
Or it angered me. Yeah. Also, another thing that passive voice can indicate is that you're feeling hesitant on some level about what you're trying to say. And so another reason getting rid of it makes writing more fun is because it's kind of an encouragement for you to be more confident and assertive about whatever you're saying.
Yeah, a lot of people are hedging their bets when they're writing.
It's like a throat clearing. Yeah, right. It's like, I was going to maybe do this thing instead of just saying that you're doing it.
Absolutely. In terms of writing also, do you have any tips or tricks that you would suggest to people that are having to create written content, as it were, or maybe works of art?
I think that, I have zero musical talent or skill. So, but this might be somewhat true or the same for music. But I think writing is something that is just a technique, and you practice it a lot, and it can come automatically. And the best way to make that practice worthwhile and to make it sort of come automatically is to immerse yourself in the kind of writing that you would like to do. So you find content that you admire, and if you think, okay, if I could do anything, I would want it to look or sound like this, then you just read a lot of it. You don't even try to imitate it at first. You just spend a lot of time reading it, and then you practice writing every day. And then if you've really immersed yourself in the style of writing that you want to achieve, then it just automatically comes out in your practice. It's an automatic imitation, so you don't actually have to think about it.
Gotcha. And so what would that be for you as far as the famous favorite author or authors?
Well, what can happen with, in my line of work, for example, I've written about William Faulkner. And so you have to distinguish between, you don't want to write about, when you're writing literary criticism, you don't want to write your literary essay, your criticism essay, in the style of the writer that you're reading a lot of. And so you actually have to try to avoid, you have to be vigilant about avoiding writing like Faulkner or Hemingway or something when you're writing criticism. So then you find literary critics who have a style that you admire, and then you read a lot of that kind of stuff, and then that's the style that you want to evoke.
You can do your critique of Faulkner in the style of Hemingway, and you'll be okay.
That would be slightly better than doing your critique of Faulkner in the style of Faulkner.
Gotcha. And so do you actually, in the course of what you're doing now, vis-a-vis Howard University. Do you have the chance to write much in the Faulkner style, or not so much?
Well, I would like to do more creative writing, but I haven't really had the time because I have to, when you're on the tenure track in academia, the publication requirements are pretty demanding. And so, and it takes a long time to write the kind of work that gets published in academia. And so I just have to devote most of my extra time to doing that kind of writing.
That takes us to, we were kind of talking offline before about the whole contentization of things these days, and even from music to visual, photography, video, etc. We're getting to a point, I think, where, like it or not, the trend is towards, other than a certain little stratum of folks at the very peak, there is very much a commoditization and a need. The web and society in general, the way it's functioning, needs to keep being fed content. And you mentioned you actually have a similar experience.
Definitely, yeah. So I have and I'm sure there are other academics who have the same concern, is that we have to publish whether we necessarily have anything to say or not. And so I really want to make sure that I'm doing work that I feel like sort of needs to be scholarship, that there's a need for it. There's a reason for it to exist in the world, but whether you have something to say or not, you still are expected to publish. And so that's the content of academia, is to just get lines on your CV, is what people say.
And how often do you have to publish those sort of things, and how long do those tend to be?
Well, it depends on it depends on the tenure requirements for your institution. But so at Howard, I'm going to be aiming to either have a book published or 3 to 5 articles in peer-reviewed journals by the time I apply for tenure. So that's in the next couple of years, in the next 3 years.
Is there a word count for those articles?
Yeah, usually they're about they're usually between 6 to 12,000 words, and so around 20 to 25 double-spaced 12-point font pages.
Gotcha. That sounds like a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot because it has to be very thoroughly researched, and so it's not like a personal essay that you can just kind of write in a couple of days. Unfortunately, you have to really do a lot of research and have an interpretive argument, and it's a lot of work.
That reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask you about, but meanwhile, we'll take a very brief pause for a few seconds, and we'll be right back with Dr. Rachel Watson. And we're back with Dr. Rachel Watson. That was indeed a short pause. By the way, that was a little loop from On the Drapung Roof by Mr. Steve Dance from our last episode. That would be episode 57, which you can find by going to themultimedianinja.com/57. Simple enough, as you can find any episode by that methodology. You just go to themultimedianinja.com/ and the number of the episode with no padding. So that should be simple enough, I hope. And I do highly encourage that you go check out also episode 56. Is it 56? 55. 56 is Brian Stevens, which is also awesome. Episode 55 is from my trip to Cuba. And I think whether you listen to the audio, or in this case, you may want to check out the video, but because there's a lot of cool video shots. But in either case, you don't want to listen to the video when you're driving or anything. But if you're at the gym or something, you can, I guess if you're on this bike, you can do either one. Anyway, I digress. I hope you go and listen to all of them. And you can even start with episode 1 with Mr. Harold Sellers, our inaugural episode. And of course, if you're on the multimedianinja.com website, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to the email list, because you'll get all kinds of goodies and stuff. We just sent out an exclusive little bit of behind the scenes from our Steve Dance interview. And we'll have all kind of stuff like that. We might even have some trips to Monterey Mexican restaurant coming up. Who knows? For those of you in the area. But anyway, I was just about to get to before the segment that we like to call, What the Heck Are You Doing? And that is where we ask our guest what tip, trick, philosophy, software, hardware, etc. is rocking hard for you today, this week, this month, this year, etc. And what would that be for you?
I thought I didn't have an answer to this question, but as I think about it, even though I do most of my writing by longhand, I nonetheless use a lot of technology. So my current favorite technology for writing is the Freedom apps that shut off all the internet. So I don't know if that's a kind of that's a bad thing to advertise on a podcast, but
no, that's fine. I use Rescue Time, and it besides tracking the amount of time you spend, like on Ableton Live, like we are now, or Adobe Premiere, or certain websites, it'll give you a report on how productive you're being, and it will also shut off like Facebook, Twitter, etc. after like 10 minutes or 15 minutes of use. And then you have to go through this whole rigmarole to get it back if you want to. So
I find that I need things like that to help me stay on task. But the program I use most right now is Apple Pages. I recently switched from Microsoft Word because I've had a contentious and dramatically destructive relationship with Microsoft Word for a very long time. So now I use Apple Pages, and Adobe Acrobat Pro is my new favorite thing. And an app on my phone, Photo to PDF, for when I'm working in archives.
PDF.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to look that up. And Freedom, I had not heard that one. So does Freedom work across your devices and your computer?
I shut off all my gadgets.
Yes, that's one problem with Rescue Time. It's not on iOS yet for some reason. I don't think it may not be on Android either, but they need to fix that. Hint, hint. So why do you like Pages versus Word?
It's much more intuitive. The layout is much more elegant. It doesn't crash without saving my work. That's really the only reason that I like it better. That's the most important reason.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
Yes.
And I actually have a client I'm working with right now that sent me a very good note taker and planner and very meticulous, which I like. I like having clients that are like, I need this. And so he sent me a Word document for planning with some script for voiceover and various notes. And I did the whole part 1 of this project without knowing that he had comments in the sidebar, because I don't have Word on my Apple computers. And even on the Word doc, you got to go through a whole bunch of rigmarole to get them to show up.
Yeah, you have to go to this little random drop-down menu and click Final Showing Markup in order to see the comments. And I've had students in the past submit essays that were supposed to have been revised according to my comments, and I see no changes. And so I say, what is the content of your revision here? And they say, well, Dr. Watson, I didn't see any comments that you made. So it's unclear whether that was a truthful kind of exchange.
Yeah, I'm with you. I kind of like Pages better than Word. I wish people would use that one more. I forget, is there markup that you can share in Pages? Or
I don't know, because I only started using it in the past few weeks, and so I haven't had the need to make any comments yet. But one thing I also like about it is that it's really easy to export the files into Word or PDF.
Right.
So when you need to send it to somebody, because people don't use Pages very often, and so it's easy to turn it into a Microsoft Word document.
I've actually been using Google Docs a lot, which are kind of crap as far as functionality, just really, really basic, and I understand why, but the good part is you're online and you can totally collaborate on stuff. So if you got a basic need without a lot of stuff, I don't even know if you can mark up. I think I have actually marked up on that.
Yeah, you can.
So
when Microsoft Word crashed on me one time when I was at school, I had one of my favorite students in the office with me, luckily. And so she showed me how I could nonetheless access and edit the document that I needed to get into, because it had been emailed to me, and so I could just open it in Google Docs without needing Microsoft Word, even though it was an MS Word document.
That's when the client sent me the stuff in Microsoft Word, which I use Gmail. I open it up and it automatically comes up as a Google Doc on my Mac. So, but the markup does not. And I don't think Google Docs can even display, if you want to, the Word markup. But I could be wrong. So it'll display its own markup. So
I just think that we should all stop using Microsoft Word so that it dies like a vestigial limb.
Yes, I like that. That's the one I was going for. Yes, indeed. So I may have sidetracked you too. I believe you had some other thoughts or tips for young or aspiring writers, or people that are forced to write or would like to write but don't feel good about it.
Yeah, I think that one of the so writing is not mystical. It's just it's just something you practice like anything else, and you get better at it the more you do it. But also that writing is just revising, and so you in order to revise well, you have to actually imagine yourself as the kind of audience that you want to reach, and then reread your work in the kind of sympathetic position of a member of that audience. And so it's a good practice to imagine yourself as another person reading your own writing, and then you revise according to what you see. And you have to be kind of objective and dispassionate about it.
And go, wow, this is just
See, no, that's what you don't do. You're like a forensic scientist. You just sort of look at it and you assess the situation, neutral, objective, not emotionally, and not criticizing yourself.
Now, if objectively you just think it's complete then
perhaps. If it's like really bad, then you gotta just keep practicing. But no matter how, it's like a dancer, like dancers fall down a lot in practice. And so things do not look as beautiful on the stage as they do during practice. And so you can't beat yourself up for those kinds of drafts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that I find over and over again that in different episodes, I've come back to the fact that there's certain people that want to think their stuff is ready to go. It's ready for, if it's music, it's ready for commercial radio, and in fact, it needs a lot more massaging. And then there's folks that are just beating themselves senseless about stuff that really could be, if not a minimum viable product, at minimum, it could actually be something that's completely viable, and they're just dithering around because they don't want to. They're scared of releasing it to
Pull
the public.
Trigger. Yeah, I think actually, I just thought of the best tip I think for writing is to write every day. And don't worry about the content. Like if you keep a journal or even just pages that you throw away. So every morning I write for an hour or two, and I just write really dumb stuff, like stuff that I never reread. But it's a way of practicing just articulating myself and putting my thoughts into sentences. And so it's literally just banal, woke up, ate breakfast, whatever. But it's like it's a muscle that you just kind of work. And so that way, when you actually have to sit down and perform writing, it comes a lot faster because your muscle is already ready. And so you don't have to obsess about it and get all tense and worry. It can just kind of flow out.
That answers my question as to whether you have a journaling practice or anything.
I do have a journaling practice, and I hope that my literary executives burn all of them when I die. so nobody ever sees them.
Oh, yeah. So do you do like stream of consciousness in there anywhere, or is it more
I don't actually do stream of consciousness. When I was younger, I would write in that kind of free association way, but now, and this has been the greatest innovation for me personally, I really make myself write in complete sentences. And so I don't just...
Interesting.
I write whatever's on my mind, but I write slowly enough so that I'm using proper grammar and proper sentence construction. And I try to choose the words that are going to be the most precise for what I'm trying to say, even if what I'm trying to say is the quality of my scrambled eggs.
Interesting.
And that gets me in a practice to where I can write well when I need to.
I have to admit, I'm the opposite. To the extent that I do, which I've tried on and off, time is a factor, and producing the podcasts and the content for the web and all that stuff. But I've tried on and off to do some sort of journaling, sort of in the morning sometimes, and those tend to be just complete stream of consciousness to just open the channel and then later on, nothing usually comes from it, but I'll usually start getting something out, and then if it's something that's going to be used, I will come back later and start brutally attacking it with the scalpel. So, but yeah, that's I kind of tailed off on that.
Well, I think it's good. I think that everybody has to sort of discover their own method and their own process. And it's going to be, there are all these books by writers about, well, this is what I do and here are my habits. And it's tempting to try to just imitate what successful people do. But it seems more the case that you have to discover your own kind of individual pattern for success. And so whatever your habits are that produces the kind of work that you want produced, then do that. So if stream of consciousness works for you, then that's great.
I guess we could steal a quote from Nike and say, if you want to be a writer, just do it.
Just do it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome, Nike. I was thinking about your question about content. And I think that one thing that can be really easy to fall into is when you're writing, only writing the things that are interesting to you. And you can get kind of caught up in your own head, and you can get caught up in thinking and just kind of unconsciously assuming that, well, because this is interesting to me, this is automatically going to be interesting to my audience. You don't even realize you're thinking that, but that's the thing that's guiding your writing. And if you keep a journal, or if you keep like some kind of morning writing that you just throw away at the end of the day, that can be the place where you write stuff that's just interesting for you, because there's no audience except for you for that. But when you're generating content, you can think about it more like, what do I want to give to people and share with people that's actually going to be useful or funny or entertaining or edifying in some way to them. And so you write. When you're writing in that way, you write out of a spirit of generosity. You're thinking, okay, what am I really going to give to people instead of just describing some awesome thing that I did? I mean, you can describe some awesome thing that you did, but you can do it in a way that gives them something.
Right.
And you think about what that thing is that you want to give. Which sounds really obvious, but I find it really difficult when I'm writing to keep that in mind.
Right. So that kind of reminds me of the headspace practice, which of course you're familiar with from the last episode where we talked with Steve Dance. But anyway, in case you missed it, headspace is the application for meditation practice, or what they would now call mindfulness. To sound a little less crystals and flower power and what have you, but it's something I've been using for a while. And the short story is there'll be a link to it, of course, in the show notes, but if you're interested. But the main way in which it ties in with what you were just saying is that he's talking about in pursuit, if you will, which is a bad word in this case, but in pursuit of relaxation, patience, etc., good relationships, lowering your stress, it is helpful to actually think about others and think less about you. And it's not necessarily an altruistic thing. It's just it's a way to get where you want to go. So I hadn't thought about content actually being, when you're writing, trying to keep that in mind as well. But that's
thinking about your audience, yeah. And it feels like a nicer way to think about it instead of just the commoditization aspect, because content is it makes me squeamish because it sounds like, well, I'm just creating a product that's being sold. But I guess the good side of that is to think about, well, if you're creating a product that's to be sold, then it means that there's a need for it in the market. And so you're fulfilling some kind of need or desire on the part of other people. And so it's just a kind of friendlier way, I think, of thinking about the commoditization, is to think about what I'm giving to people that they want.
And it helps with your search engine optimization.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of the Multimedia Ninja Podcast. I hope you'll come back next week and bring your friends. Don't forget you can subscribe to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast at themultimedianinja.com and have each episode waiting for you. You can also sign up to the email. So we're going to have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. I hope you'll stay with us. And don't forget, if you don't know what port you're sailing to, no wind is favorable. See you next time.